Good day, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. And today I would like to give you my off-the-cuff review of Lies of P Overture. Now, before I jump fully into my review, just a little bit I want to say about this type of video, because it's a new series that I'm trying out. Because I've wanted to do more review-style videos on games like when I've actually finished them, instead of just the first impressions stuff that is What's This Then and the backlog versus. So hopefully you'll like it, and we'll see how it goes. The format that I want to approach a lot of my videos with, and that is no different for this one, is much that of talking about games with your friends. You know, that's the kind of style, that's the kind of vibe that I want these videos to kind of give off, but obviously with more of a tone of, hey, we're actually looking at this stuff critically as well, and, you know, is it worth your time and money? You know, I want to answer those questions, but I like the idea of making a video where it's just like, hey, this is how I would talk about this review of a game with my friends, etc. So, hopefully you like that. Now, the footage you're seeing in the background is from my live stream of when I played the DLC, which, just a quick plug, you can find on twitch.tv/Redeyes_NI, or the second YouTube channel, Redeyes number 2, both in the description. But I intend for this review to be experienced, you can do audio only. I won't be making any reference to anything that's on the screen, it's just there as a backdrop for those of you who don't mind seeing a little bit of footage from whatever it is I'm talking about, you know, so in this case, this is from the Lies of P DLC. However, this is like literally the start, so don't worry, you're not seeing any crazy late game stuff going on here, but if you don't want to see spoiler stuff, then you can just experience this video through audio only, and you don't have to see any of that. So, hopefully that's all good. Now, with that being said, let's get right on into it. So, the Lies of P Overture DLC, developed, as you might imagine, by NeoWiz, comes to all the platforms that Lies of P originally came to, as you might imagine. Crazy that. Came out on the 6th of June, so I'm a little bit later getting around to the review on this, because I was playing it whenever it came out, because it was the shadow dropped at the Summer Games Fest, which is crazy. But I started playing it, and then the Steam Next Fest happened, so I started playing just a ton of demos, and that sort of that delayed me a bit. But you can pick this one up for £24.99 or $29.99. And just to give a quick TLDR of what I think of the price to how much time I spent in the DLC ratio, I believe that is very worth it. I spent about 14-ish hours with this. It's hard to get an exact number because I was streaming it and there were some breaks and stuff like that. But I believe it's very worth. So if you wanted that TLDR, I believe this DLC is extremely worth that. Now, to jump into some notes here about the game. On a technical state, the game runs extremely well. Lies of P ran extremely well at launch, the DLC runs extremely well at launch. However, I did notice a minor visual bug with the flickering snow. Now, this only happened like right at the start, in the very, very beginning, sort of, there's a snowy area. It only happened there, and like one time near the end of the game where there was some more snow, but that was about it. And I understand that there was a driver update that came out during shortly after the DLC's release, which, from what I understand, may have actually fixed this, so I'm not really pinning that against the game too much. It could just be a driver issue, but it wasn't big enough for me to actually go out and be like, oh damn, I really need to upgrade that driver, you know. So, but that is the only technical thing I saw wrong with this DLC. Other than that, it runs absolutely beautifully. And since I played it the first time, I've now upgraded to a 4K 240Hz screen, and it still runs beautifully, you know, just NeoWiz know how to optimize their games for PC. It's very nice. So difficulty-wise, to speak a bit about the difficulty, because they actually added different difficulties as part of the DLC update, or maybe they added it a little bit before, I'm not too sure, this is just when I'm seeing it. I played it on the, I'm going to call it the quote-unquote hardest difficulty, but there's 3 difficulties now, and the hardest one is what the base game was. So the hardest one is just kind of normal difficulty if you played the base game already, and then the other 2 just make the game a bit easier. So I played technically on the hardest difficulty, but it's just the same difficulty as the base game. And in terms of difficulty for the DLC, it felt really well balanced. Enemies were hitting hard, but not too hard. I felt like I was doing really good damage. So, in terms of actual difficulty, the only time I felt like the game was like, damn, this is hard, was the final boss. And you have options to make things easier. So obviously you've got the difficulty options, but you've also got like the game has the summoning mechanic to make bosses, a bit more manageable, a bit easier and stuff. So, and I did try this summoning mechanic on a couple of the different bosses, and it makes them very, very easy, in my opinion. So you've got options. If you're the sort of person that goes into Souls-like games and likes the vibe, likes the aesthetic, likes the gameplay, but doesn't necessarily like the overbearing challenge, if you run into any of these bosses and you're like, hey, I don't like how hard this is, you can absolutely turn down the difficulty, or you can start summoning co-op. So, well, I say co-op, it's not multiplayer co-op, it's like the co-op summons to help you, AI and all that. Now, to give a bit about the premise and a little bit about the story setup, you get to the DLC midway through the base game, so you cannot, unfortunately, just start up the game and immediately jump into the DLC. I found this one out because when Lies of P came out originally, I played it on Game Pass, and it's no longer on Game Pass, and I went to buy it on Steam, and then seen that you couldn't just start the DLC, so I had to then go back to Xbox app and buy it on there and buy the DLC. Thankfully, everything was on sale, so it all cost the same, so that was very good. But to actually start the DLC, yeah, you get about halfway through the game, you'll be told a pop-up will appear and say like, hey, go here, start the DLC. That's one thing I've noticed about Lies of P. It likes the more obscure ideas of how a lot of these things are done, especially when you compare to like From Software. But the game just sort of tells you that these are the weird way things are done. It doesn't leave anything up to chance. Whereas, if you think about like the Dark Souls 1 DLC, like how the hell did anyone ever figure out how to start that DLC without, Googling it? But anyway, so you go and interact with this old Stargazer, and you are transported to some new place where you very quickly find out that everything is not what was normal, just to leave it at that. But I've also a thing about this DLC, it's a very personal story going on in this DLC as well. It's not like another big grand thing that the main game ends up being, by the end. Although the main game is obviously a very personal story as well. But this one feels especially personal. To the characters that you meet and to the people everything's going on with. And this DLC also feels like a bit more alive. Because obviously the base game, you kind of feel like you're exploring this like dead world. The puppet frenzy has well and truly like destroyed everything and all this sort of stuff, whereas this one just feels a little bit more life to it, like more moving parts, which was a nice different feel from the base game. Now, to speak on gameplay, the moment-to-moment combat gameplay is pretty much the same. There's nothing really to change there in terms of, stamina management. You swing your weapon, enemy swings their attack, you dodge or you parry, or, then you repair your weapon. All this sort of stuff is exactly the same. There is a new status ailment called Freeze. It felt thematic to the fact that a lot of these areas are a bit cold, lots of snow around the place, so it felt thematic in that way, but it didn't really feel like it added much to the game overall, just like a new thing, a new bit of variety. Also new weapons. A good number of new weapons. I was actually very pleasantly surprised with how many new weapons there were. Two of them I used through the DLC, and one of them is potentially my favorite weapon in a lot of Souls-likes. I'd say some Bloodborne weapons, maybe I hold a little bit higher, and probably some Elden Ring weapons, actually. It's hard to beat a lot of the Elden Ring weapons, some of those are crazy. But there's some really, really cool stuff in this, really, really cool. I have no doubt that there will be something for everyone, and obviously with the way Lies of P's like crank system works, where you can change the scaling on weapons, no matter what your build, you'll find a weapon and you'll be like, hey, this is cool, I'll just go change it to match my build. And it might not be as efficient, but it'll be like 90%, it'll be really good. So I had a really good time with the new weapons, two of them particularly, like I said. Now, all the new bosses, very, very good. I don't think there was any of them that I fought against that I'm like, hey, this boss sucked or this boss was like actively bad. There's one boss I can think of that I'm just like, I kind of beat it kind of quick and it kind of feels like a bit of a nothing boss in my mind, but you know how these games go. You might run into that boss and have the hardest time ever and then be like, wow, this boss really stands out. It's all very, that sort of thing is very personal, but like I said, all these bosses, none of them stood out to me as like, hey, there's something actively wrong with this, you know, this design is bad, you know. All good, you know, quality bar, good. However, I will say, in terms of the best bosses in this DLC, two of them really stand out. One of them is probably the best dual boss fight in any Souls game ever. And I know that's kind of big words, and this is an off-the-cuff review, so maybe I would change my mind, you know, if I give it a lot more thought and really deep dived into what makes a good dual boss fight and had a look at, you know, comparatively other dual boss fights, because there's obviously some great ones in the Souls series mainly, but this one was just so good. The thoughtful way that it thinks about how you have to interact with two entities attacking at potentially the same time and like kind of trying to keep track of both of them, and just so thoughtfully done. And I believe if you're not a big fan of dual boss fights, I think this one could change your mind. And if you love dual boss fights, I think this will be one of your favorites. So had a really good time with the bosses, and the last boss was crazy. Hardest boss in this game and the base game, 100%. Classic bit of, you know, the expansion adds a big crazy boss that's just, you know, really hard. But like I said, there is that summon mechanic, and the difficulty options. So if you don't want to deal with that difficulty, if you just want the witness, the spectacle, then you can absolutely do that. Now, to speak on the new areas, I would say the level design has actually been improved a good little bit here. Lots of different little ways to explore. There's even a couple of times when the game just went, hey, here's two like actual ways to go, which is something I feel like Lies of P didn't really do in the base game. The base game was very linear. Now, it had lots of like, you know, optional exploration areas or like little side bits to dip into and be like, oh, hey, I found this. But the actual level design was very linear. Whereas this one, don't get me wrong, it's linear as well, but less so. Lots more exploration and like, oh wow, this looks like it could be a whole area. This looks like it could be a whole area. Multiple times throughout this DLC, I felt like, wow, I've got so many ways to explore here, where to start. And I love that in these sorts of games. Now, in terms of the actual like visuals and the vibes of the new locations, all really good, apart from one I would say is maybe a bit visually bland. It's kind of like a prison. It's not terribly interesting. Actual design-wise, like exploring it is interesting and fun. Lots of little like side rooms and little paths and underways and stuff. Very cool in that regard. But just visually, it's a bit like meh, you know, not a big fan of this. The starting area is actually very, very fun. Really good introduction area to the DLC. A lot of fun to explore. You can feel a lot of personality. You can feel like the devs just had a great time like making this, which I'll always enjoy in games. But yeah, the rest of the areas, they're just, you know, they're just good. You know, good. Music continues to be good. This is another area where the game never really stood out in my eyes. Apart from the records, I will say the records have some absolute bangers in there. But in terms of like, you know, boss music or stuff like that, you know, the game never really stood out to me in that regard. And that, I would say that continues to be the case for the DLC as well. There's also a bunch of new records. There's some bangers in there. So if you like your collecting records, you like listening to them back at the hub, you're going to love that. And I also loved it as well. Now, I will say, just sort of to give kind of, to start wrapping up basically on the discussion of this, this DLC kind of gave me a newfound like sort of respect and love for Lies of P as a whole. When I played Lies of P originally back when it came out, I liked it. I could respect it as a really, really fine crafted Souls-like, especially one that wasn't made by From Software. This is probably the gold standard of non-From Software Souls-likes. And even then, I would imagine some people would say it's even up there as being better than some of them. Me personally, I wouldn't have said that, But after playing this DLC, I think it's kind of given me a newfound, like, kind of respect for Lies of P as a whole. So, if that isn't a good indication that this DLC is of good quality and worth your time and money, in my opinion, I don't think much else will. Because I will probably go and replay through the game now, which is something I didn't think I was ever going to do. I knew I was going to play the DLC, but I didn't think I was going to like the game enough to really just run through it again and again. Whereas this DLC kind of has made me want to. Especially with all like the new weapons and stuff, you know, getting to explore base game with DLC weapons. That's just always fun and a good time. But basically, to give you a quick conclusion, in a lot of ways this DLC feels like more Lies of P. So if you like Lies of P, you're going to love this DLC. And I believe you'll love all the little additions. And the quality bar feels even higher. The quality bar for Lies of P in the base game, I feel like was already high. The game just was always good. In my opinion, you know, there was never a time when I was playing Lies of P and I felt like, damn, this sucks, this is bad, I am having a bad time with this game. Lies of P just feels good the whole way through, and this DLC continues that, except the bar has just been raised to, I would say, you know, feels pretty great the whole time. So, I would really recommend it. I think you should buy it and play it, especially if you really like Lies of P. I think this is definitely something you should be picking up and playing. So yeah, that's it for my off-the-cuff review. And I would appreciate it if you'd let me know in the comments just what you think of this sort of style of review. You know, this more like, hey, this is like I'm speaking with my friends, talking about my experience with this game type video. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.